Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Harry Brelsford from SMB Nation. You're joining us for our ongoing series of weekly webinars, Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and early evening over in Europe. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day. That's what we're finding. Our biggest challenge, maybe your biggest challenge these days, is time. And everybody's getting busy, and rightfully so. In fact, this webinar plays very well into that conversation about efficient migrations and maybe getting time back. But again, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. Now, a little bit of housekeeping as always. If you could be so kind as to use the chat feature to ask your questions, we have Heather over in the control room, and she will be marshaling up the questions and forwarding them to me, and I'll ask those as we go along. This webinar will end promptly at 11 a.m. Pacific today, so take that under advisement as you think about the questions that you might have. Further housekeeping, the fall conference site is up at fall.smbnation.com, so we have the 11th annual where we've teamed with Redmond Channel Partner Magazine and some other fun folks to have the fall conference. fall.smbnation.com. Go ahead and learn a little bit along the way, and I got a little secret for you. Got a little secret. If you look closely, really closely at the content agenda, you'll see that we're weaving a migration story in. And that's probably, only if the walls could only talk, you would realize migrations are probably one of the hottest areas in 2013 and 2014. I'll leave you with that teaser because we want to jump right into it with Chad Lindley. Now, Chad, before I hand off to you, I got a question. Are you out of the wonderful city of Austin, Texas? Are you there today? Is you join us?
Actually, I'm joining you out of Madison, Wisconsin, which is also a beautiful city, but not in Austin.
Yeah.
It's the Austin of the North, from what I hear.
I was going to say, that is kind of Austin North. Well, good. Well, sir, you're welcome anytime, and Madison's cool. Let's jump right into it if you want to take over the screen, sir.
Sure, absolutely. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be going through the new versions of Exchange. We're going to talk a little bit about the features. We're going to discuss some of the considerations if you're thinking about whether you want to have an on-premises Exchange server, whether you want to have everything in the cloud, or a little bit of both. So we'll talk about some of that. In terms of an agenda, we're going to talk through Exchange on your terms, and I just kind of put this in here as a placeholder because really that's kind of Microsoft's theme lately, is they want to make sure that they're being flexible in the implementations, and there are really a lot of options in terms of architecture, where your mailboxes will reside, and the features that you're going to utilize, and not only with Exchange, it's how it ties into SharePoint, and there's a lot of things to consider, Link being one of them. So we'll talk through some of those and how your decisions will impact what's available to you. I'm going to talk through some of the features. I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison of some of the features are available in both places, but there's some that are specific or that are more prevalent in what we see for Exchange Online, and so we'll highlight some of those as well. And then we'll talk through some of the considerations that you want to think about when you're doing your decision on whether you want it cloud or on-prem, and you can do a mixture, so kind of both worlds. So then after that, we'll talk a little bit about migration. So once you've decided where you want to go and how you want to get there, you have to figure out, how to get there. So we'll talk through some of the drivers for migration and considerations, whether or not you think you might need a partner, and then we'll talk about some migration solutions and how you can choose the right one for your migration, because not all migrations are the same. Then we'll talk about the Dell approach. We'll talk a little bit about how we prepare for a migration. We take kind of a standardized approach, regardless of source and target, and so we'll talk through that. We'll kind of highlight, the scope of what we cover, and then we'll do a specific demonstration that may be most relevant for this audience of a product that we have that is a hosted migration solution. So in addition to whether you want your end platform to be hosted or not, you also have options in terms of your migration architecture and whether you want to have your servers sitting in your office or whether you'd rather have it hosted somewhere where you don't have to deal with them. So we can talk through that. So to start off, let's talk a little bit about Exchange. Really, you're getting similar features, whether you do it on-prem, hosted, or both. The term for both you'll hear a lot is hybrid, for those that aren't familiar with it. Basically, it just means that some of your mailboxes can be an on-premises Exchange server, and some of them can be in Office 365, and they can communicate with each other as if they were on the same server. And so Microsoft's put a lot of effort into making sure that that experience is very similar. But you're getting mail, calendaring, contact management. There's a lot of collaboration features there as well. And in addition to the consistency between user interactions, they also wanted to make sure that you're getting a consistent interface. So in older versions of Exchange, if you went into it through Outlook, you got one experience. If you went in through Outlook Web Access, which is kind of the web client for getting into Exchange, you sometimes had a very different experience. And over the last few revisions, they've made a lot of effort to make those consistent. And with the most recent releases, they're also carrying that forward with the mobile devices. So whether you're accessing from your PC, whether you're accessing from a mobile device, you should have a consistent experience, and they're really striving to make that happen. For those that aren't familiar with Exchange, it does depend on Active Directory. That kind of is where you're storing your user objects, your distribution list, where you have your information that supports the Exchange mailbox. And in order to access Exchange, you have to get credentials and security through Active Directory. So even if you're deciding that you want all of your mailboxes to be in Office 365, you may decide, and many do, that you want to maintain Active Directory locally. And in those cases, you want to be able to log into the local Active Directory for security purposes and access, and you don't necessarily want to have to log in again to get to your mailbox that's hosted in Office 365. And so there are things available. They have a directory sync agent that keeps the two directories consistent. There's identity federation that you can set up, which will give you access to the same information and credentials. And then you also have single sign-on so that you're logging in once and able to access your mailbox as well. And so it really streamlines it for your end users. It makes it more transparent on where their mailbox is. And so those are some of the features that they've added to make it a more streamlined experience for you. Also Exchange, and I touched on this a little bit, but Exchange can combine with other solutions in the suite. So a specific example is with a feature they've added called site mailboxes, where you can have content in SharePoint that you can access from a mailbox essentially in Exchange. And it's a way to collaborate and have information that you're able to share and work on from Outlook, but it may not necessarily be stored in your Exchange databases. And so they're really kind of trying to blur the lines of storage and access so that you can get a more collaborative experience. So what are some of the features? Simplified administration. They've really tried to make it easier to manage users, and this is especially important for organizations that decide to do a hybrid deployment. So you want to be able to manage all of your users, whether it's someone sitting on an Exchange server in your data center or whether it's somebody in Office 365. You don't want to have to go to two different places to administer them. And all of that's controlled through the new Exchange Administration Center, web-based interface that gives you access to both environments. There's integrated availability so that there's monitoring and management going on behind the scenes that makes sure that all of the roles and services are available and interacting appropriately, and so that's more automated than it was in the past. There are new ways to handle the massive amounts of email that we all get these days, getting some of that time back, as was referenced earlier. And so there's a new ways to handle the conversation view. There are mail tips. So if you're sending out to a distribution list, for an example, it will tell you how many users are on that distribution list before you send it, so that you don't end up sending out mass amounts of email unintentionally. And there's ways to reduce clutter as well with inline compose and reply features so that you don't have as many things building up in your mailbox. There's the consistent interface we touched on already, but it's also touch enabled. So if you're using tablets, those features are available to you. SharePoint integration we touched on with the site mailboxes, but they're really doing a consolidated effort to make sure that you have access to all of the features of both products and being able to access them in kind of an integrated way. One of the big pushes for this version, the latest version, was around data loss prevention. So there are new rules that you can set to help you identify and monitor and protect data so that it doesn't inadvertently or even intentionally get sent outside of the organization. And all of this is built into Exchange so that you can kind of control the data flow outside of the email system. And so a lot of organizations are leveraging that to protect themselves from data loss getting out and anything that they have that they wanted to protect. The management of e-discovery is better as well, and in some places, if you're reading, you'll find this talked about in terms of an enhanced search. But really, this gives you a way to search for content across multiple products in the suite. And so you're not just doing a search within the Exchange mailboxes or going to SharePoint and doing a search across the sites. You can actually search across the suite of products and find all content relevant to your search. And so it really makes it easier and more robust in terms of what information you can get back. I wanted to highlight a few things specific to Exchange Online. Now, some of these are available for an on-premises server as well. Some of them are more relevant, at least from what we see, in terms of how they're used when they're online. And so one of the things that happens is you get automatic patching, and upgrades for that matter, where you're not having to manage the Exchange servers anymore. All of that effort and expense is taken over when you're doing Exchange Online, and that's managed for you off-site. And so you're no longer responsible for making sure that happens in a timely manner. The archiving feature, there's what's called a personal archive. Some people call it an archive mailbox. It's essentially a second mailbox for the users. Now, you can do this with an on-premises Exchange server as well, and you can put it on less expensive storage so that you have two areas that they can access, their primary mailbox and a second mailbox that's their archive mailbox. But what we see it used for a lot actually is, or an architecture we see a lot is to have, even for those doing an on-prem Exchange mailbox, they may have their archive mailbox hosted at Office 365. And they may want to manage locally their primary mailbox but have their archive mailbox elsewhere. And in terms of a migration, that may mean that you want to move some of the content to the archive mailbox and some of it to the primary mailbox. That could be based on where it's coming from. You may have, depending on your system, you may already have a local archive or local PSTs, and you want to put those into an archive mailbox so that you're no longer having local data that you can't manage very well. But also in terms of ongoing, you can have rules that will move data over to that archive as well. And so that's a feature that we see a lot of our customers using, migration customers in particular, where they want to make sure that data is accessible and searchable and a spot they can manage it, but they may not want it to go into the primary mailbox. That gives you another option. For the online, the availability guarantee is an important thing for many. So they want to make sure that if they are going to trust their mail system to a provider, they want to make sure that they have a guarantee that users are going to be able to access. And so the 99+ uptime guarantee, and it's actually financially backed with many of their service level agreements, that is the way that organizations can take some comfort in knowing that that's going to be taken care of for them. Yes?
Yeah, observation on that first point is that full disclosure, we use Office 365, and so it is the Exchange Online experience. And with the automatic patching, this past weekend, and the the email system had notified us there'd be a enhancement service upgrade. It was automatic over the weekend. I think on Sunday I had to log off, log on, and I believe what they were doing, don't hold me to this because I only glanced at it temporarily, I think it was taking it up to the next level of Exchange. To your point, it was seamless, it was automatic, essentially automatic patching. I loved it, and I logged off, I logged on. I'm now getting, there are a couple of changes. I mean, it's not changes in terms of, creating an email and hit send. I mean, that's kind of standard stuff. But several times a day, I now get an email from myself called Synchronization Log, and I get some other reporting, that I didn't otherwise get. I'm still learning what that all means, so, don't drill too deep on me. But I just wanted to give a shout out to your first point that I've experienced this And quite frankly, it's a pleasure. I mean, you get up, you log on Sunday, you kind of peek at email. That's a far cry from the old days. Let me tell you, the on-prem reboot, fingers crossed.
Yeah. So yeah, and I'm sure what probably happened there is the original version of Office 365 was based on Exchange 2010. Internally, it was kind of called Wave 14. And they have been slowly kind of upgrading everyone. We have some test accounts that we use, obviously, some tenants, and so we've been getting notifications on those as well. But what they're doing is they're moving you to Wave 15, which is based on Exchange 2013. And so a lot of these features that we're talking about here, some of them were available with 2010 as well, but a lot of them, particularly around the DLP, the mobility, and some other things, are really the new and hot stuff for Exchange 2013 or Wave 15, which is what you're now on. So that's good feedback. It's good to hear.
Please continue.
Sure. So in terms of security, this is another area where organizations used to wonder the best way to handle it, and it's something that you need to worry less about when you're using Exchange Online. So the malware, the spam, the antivirus updates, all of that stuff happens automatically, and you're no longer responsible for that. So you don't have to worry about how those updates are happening. So that's another benefit of considering Exchange Online. And in terms of disaster recovery, there are data centers that they have globally, and so they have replication that occurs within the data centers and redundancy there, but they also have different data centers that are able to handle any kind of disasters so that you have continuous operation. So that's part of that 99.9% guarantee, is that they have multiple backups where they can restore or keep continuous operation based on anything that happens at one particular geography. And for many organizations, that's not something easily done, especially those that are geographically centralized. There are arrangements you could make in the past, but this is something that once you're in Exchange Online, you no longer have the responsibility to worry about that. So when you're doing your comparison of cloud versus on-premises, and this analysis is different for every organization, and so you want to we just basically listed out some of the considerations that we hear people talking about. In terms of Exchange Online, some of the benefits that they like are the uptime guarantee. There's no upfront costs, essentially, in terms of hardware, architecture, any consulting that you may need to help you set up Exchange. And the costs are really predictable. So for some organizations, that's a very helpful thing, is that they don't need to worry about costs changing over time, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the consideration section as well. But we just talked about how the disaster recovery is kind of built into that. So you have kind of an inherent redundancy of your data, so there's multiple copies to protect it. Some of the considerations for online, there is some reduced control. So just like you said, your upgrade this weekend happened automatically. You have some control over when those major upgrades happen. You can delay them a little bit. You can force them to start at a certain time within a window, but it is still happening on a schedule that's set by someone else. You have a little bit less control over the architecture that's used, and you may not need to know much about it at that point, really, but there's some level of control that you don't have in terms of controlling the servers themselves, because they're managed by someone else. In terms of yep.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a couple of questions. I'm listening to the melody of your voice and ignoring my chat screen. So
okay.
Let me get back to my day job. Hold on a second. Let me move the question pane to screen 2 and extend. Okay, and folks, be sure to ask your questions, and unfortunately today we will end at 11 a.m. Pacific sharp, so take that under advisement. When will the copy of the slide deck be available? That's from David Curtis. Thank you, David. Chad, is this a public-facing slide deck, or is this Dell Confidential?
I think this is probably something we can provide, but let me check with Lacey on that, and I will get back to you guys.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure we can probably provide it.
Okay, thank you. And David Curtis, we typically get this out, thank you note out to you about 24 hours later, and so we'll have the deck on. That'll come from me. Next question's from, and I'm going to get the name wrong. Forgive me, sir. Sean Satar. Sean asked, why FOPE administration eliminate from Wave 15? Why FOPE administration eliminate from Wave 15? I don't even know what he's asking.
Yeah, so that's actually a question for Microsoft, and since I'm not from Microsoft, I don't know why they. I mean, that's essentially a component of that they included, and so that would need to go to Microsoft. I don't have the answer to that one.
Okay, Chad, please continue.
Okay, so the economies of scale can kind of work in two directions. Really, from a larger organization standpoint, if you have an on-premises exchange, there are some economies in terms of having multiple users on the same hardware and extending the cost of that hardware across multiple users. There are economies of scale there. But for smaller organizations, that really wasn't an option. I mean, you could have fewer servers, obviously, but you didn't have the large numbers of users. And when you go to Exchange Online, in a shared tenancy model, you're kind of reaping those benefits. So for smaller organizations, the consideration here is, well, going to online may be beneficial to you in terms of overall cost because you're getting some economies you wouldn't otherwise have. For larger organizations, that still may apply, but the calculation is a little more complicated because you need to determine what level of servers you would need and kind of spread that cost across. So there's the reason we list it as a consideration is it varies by organization, but it's something you want to think about. In terms of security and compliance, this is really a question of who has access to your data. If it's of a major concern for some organizations, they may want to keep all of their data within their own firewall. They may not want others to have it. I mean, in reality, you're sending mail to other organizations. It's going outside of your organization, but the storage of that itself and who has access to it and how easily they can access it, that's an open question for each organization to consider. And in terms of what level of compliance and what regulations are subject to, that's something they need to think about in terms of where they want their data stored. And then there's the support. This goes both ways as well. So do you have resources in-house that can support your organization like you need? Or is it better for you to have access to a multi-tiered support approach where you have first-level support and you can escalate that up through the Microsoft organization as needed to get assistance with your environment? So those are things to consider about when you're thinking about online. And for on-prem, many organizations still want to have total control. So we talked a little bit about upgrades in terms of architecture. This also plays into the speed of the system. So with a hosted platform, it's a shared tenancy model, and you are subject to your connection to the internet as well. And so these top three here under the benefits of the Exchange on-prem all kind of play together when you're talking about it. So you have total control over the architecture, but there's more expense to that potentially. And so you want to figure out, based on the geography and distribution of your users, how many servers you'd need, how they would need to connect, what networking would be needed to do that, and how that would impact the speed of operations if you tried to consolidate that. And then the connectivity, one of the benefits of having it on-prem is if sometimes you may lose your internet connection, but you still may have your local network operating, and in that scenario, all of the users within the organization could still communicate. They couldn't send outside if the link was down going out. But then it's just a matter of how often does that happen. So those are considerations, but from that perspective, if you are in a hosted platform and your internet connection goes down and you don't have any access out, you won't have access to your mail for that period of time. And then another big thing, especially for some organizations that have specialized applications, or they're in kind of a niche market, or they are even large organizations, I guess, where they have a lot of internal applications they're using, whether you need to, a lot of those integrate with the mail system, and so you may need to do some customizations or some specific integration with the Exchange servers. And in those cases, it kind of complicates it if you're hosting it, and you may not even have access to do some of what you need to do. And so those things need to be considered as you work through the decision. So for the things to consider with an Exchange on-prem, if a server goes down or the environment goes down, then everybody's down. And so that is something for people to consider. Everyone uses mail on a daily basis, it seems, and it's kind of critical to most business operation. And so having that down for any period of time can be an expensive thing. And so having everyone in the organization go down at once is something to think about. There are variable expenses. Sorry, was there a question?
No. Go ahead. Go ahead and finish your sentence. And I got a couple questions queued up, but go ahead and get to your break point.
Great. So there are variable expenses when you're on-prem. So as your data grows, which seems to be at an ever-increasing rate, you may need to add storage. You may need to add servers. And so it's instead of a fixed, per mailbox cost, here's what it's costing us, there are variable expenses that you need to plan for as you go forward. And then the resources and expertise, you just need to figure out if you have what you need in-house, whether you need to have consulting involved. And so that's something that you need to think about as you make this decision. We can go to a few questions.
Okay, we have, Richard Spencer. I do understand this question. I even have a personal opinion, but we'll let the experts answer it. Richard Spencer's asking, if I have a limited bandwidth T1 pipe into my facility with no option to add fiber or cable in my geography, would bandwidth limits preclude using Cloud Exchange? Or, if not, what would the impact trade-offs be? So, Chad, if you want to tackle that one, and maybe I'll pipe in a little bit too.
Yeah, it is certainly a consideration you need. The specifics of the answer are a little difficult to do in a forum like this. It really depends on the usage, how many users are there, what kind of applications are trying to leverage that same bandwidth. And so it's really kind of what's available and at what times. The answer to the second part of the question is that if you have bandwidth limitations, there certainly are impacts in terms of email download speeds, even connections. At sometimes you may have difficulty connecting if there's limited bandwidth. And so it's certainly something that you want to work through if there's any concern about it at all. And your Microsoft representatives are helpful in doing that. And they actually, I believe that there's actually an application or a connection you can do that will kind of give you the recommendations for what your bandwidth should be for your specific scenario. And so I would connect with Microsoft on that and see if they can give you some advice in terms of what other customers have seen in similar situations.
Yeah, and what I would add is I think of the weekends, and I'm using my Verizon MiFi, the little red thing I carry around, and you're up at the ski resort lodge, and you got one antenna bar or two deep in the valley. I'm on Office 365. It's fine. I mean, think about it. Email originates out there, and we send it back out there. So you could have a kind of a wacky discussion about why would we want it here. and so it's just downloading to my client. I mean, sure, a big attachment takes a long time to download, but I just haven't. I appreciate the question, but if this makes sense in a kind way, it's not my issue. You're hiking, you're in the mountains, you're out on a boat or whatever. Sure, it's a little slower, but you're still connected. You can get your emails, you can respond to the vast majority of them, and so on. Next question from Rick Harder. From a compliance standpoint, does Office, does 365 have the ability to, well, what's going on in my bag? I'll turn off that Siri. Siri's in my pocket. That's what it is. From a compliance standpoint, does 365 have the capability to provide encryption? That's from Rick Harder. Encryption is the question.
Actually, that would be a question better directed to Microsoft in terms of what they can provide you for encryption options. I think I've heard that there is some options available, but I can't be certain on that. So that would be a good thing to ask them to make sure you're getting the correct answer. Back on the original question about the connectivity, one thing to consider is that with Outlook now there is a cache mode, which really does help in terms of
Absolutely.
if you have kind of intermittent connectivity like you were referring to, where you can do a lot of work and it will sync up as it can when it has available bandwidth, and so that does help considerably in terms of you don't need to be connected with a huge pipe all the time while you're working, and so that is beneficial there.
Absolutely. So folks, just a little housekeeping. Chad, we're just past the bottom of the hour. Got about a half hour to go. Folks, be sure to ask your questions as we go along. Chad, let's move on.
Okay. So now we're going to go into how we prepare for migration. So once you've made your decision that you are ready to move and kind of you think whether you want it to be on-prem or hosted or both, how do you prepare for that migration? And really the first thing to talk about is the drivers. And so one of the things that we find is we do a lot of migrations, obviously, and there's pushes that kind of go ebbs and flows, really. But recently a lot of the migrations have been from legacy exchange platforms. And so as with all software platforms, they eventually go end of life just to maintain the supportability of the new products that they have out or the new versions. And Exchange 2003 is going to be end of life in April 2014. And there's still a significant population of Exchange that's on 2003. And so there's really a push to move off of that. Along with that is XP and the migrations for XP, which is a whole other story as well. But there's really not a great option in terms of a direct migration for 2000 or 2003 to 2013. The native tools have you do an interim two-step kind of migration, and so particularly if you want coexistence where users can free busy and you're going to do kind of a staged migration where you're not going to cut everybody over at once, there's really not a lot of good options out there. We do have an option for it, and so we can talk more to that later, but there's not really anything else out there that can do that with coexistence. A lot of organizations are just deciding that they want to leverage the efficiencies of the cloud, and so they want to go to Office 365, so that may be something that pushes them towards a migration. Whether it's through acquisition or attrition, I guess I'd say, there's still some that are on multiple platforms or on just a non-Microsoft platform, and they've decided to standardize. And so whether that's Google or Lotus Notes or Novell GroupWise or IMAP or POP or a variety of different systems, they've decided to standardize, and it may be part of their organization or it may be the whole organization that they need to move from one of those platforms to Exchange. And there are some additional considerations depending on what you're coming from in terms of how the data is stored, what needs to be converted, because some of them use different styles of email addressing that won't work in Exchange, and so there's some additional conversion that may need to happen, and so we see a lot of drive from that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the various solutions that we cover if you're going to Exchange. And then there's a lot of consolidation projects, so there may be, whether this is multiple Active Directory, multiple Exchange organizations, you've had various acquisitions or just different departments that have run separate mail systems, depending on what your history is with your organization. There may need to be a consolidation, and a lot of times, even if you're all on Exchange, there may be an AD consolidation that you want to do before, or may need to do before moving to Office 365, and so we've seen a lot of that occurring as well recently.
Chad, a question that I have is, when you start talking Active Directory, do you have a sense, I don't need exact numbers, but do you have a sense of where the AD conversation starts down in SMB? Are you seeing these conversations at the 10-user level, or is it, quite frankly, more of the M in SMB, so 200 seats, 500 seats? How does some of the more my question is this: how do some of the more sophisticated topics size up against customer size?
There is a relationship, but in most cases, it's not a direct number. So,
okay.
so the number of users is obviously a consideration in how many you have to manage, but it may also be that, a smaller organization may have applications they need to use that leverage AD, and so it's more of a multifaceted conversation than just number of users. But yeah, certainly as you move into the hundreds of users, that conversation should be happening because it's just the most efficient way to manage your user population and access and security and all of that. So it does tend to occur certainly when you're in the hundreds, but even for smaller organizations it may come up as well.
Cool. Please continue.
Okay, so this kind of lines up with the previous slide in terms of what types of migrations are, or what's driving migrations, but there are some certain considerations for each of those types. And so if you're 2003 or 2000, we'd mentioned earlier that you need to do a two-step migration. That can be a lot to handle for many organizations, and so you may want to make sure that the solution you're selecting can do a one-step migration, so you only have to deal with it once, your users only have to deal with it once, and you can be done. If you're on 2007, 2010, the native tools do support more of an upgrade scenario. You do need to be on certain roll-ups, though, so be careful before you start any migration from 2007, 2010 that you're on the correct version of that so that you can do the upgrade with the native solutions. If it is complex or you have some kind of a consolidation, you may want to consider looking for partners or another solution that may be able to do it. But for 2007, 2010, you have a fair number of options in how you proceed. For the non-Microsoft platforms, there really aren't any native solutions or many native solutions in terms of doing this. And there are some specific considerations, like I mentioned, for each of them. And so you probably want to talk with somebody that's done them before, whether that's another organization that's done a similar migration or whether it's a partner that's done multiple ones. Because experience does matter in terms of non-Microsoft platform migrations particularly, because there's a lot of different conversions, mappings that need to happen. So you want to make sure you're handling that appropriately so users still have access to the same folders and the data structure and things are as close as they could be to what they were in the source so that you don't have any business interruption. And then there are the inter-org consolidations where you may be consolidating AD, maybe consolidating Exchange organizations. And you want to make sure that when you're into something that's that complex, that you have some experience behind it so that you have a streamlined process in place. The value of
curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, curious on the breakage. Your third point on the last slide was basically non-exchange environments. Are you seeing some breakage out there where people are like, well, since I have to migrate anyways, and they're going over to either a Google or I just made up the question. I'm just curious. Apparently, it's a legitimate point. It's in your slide. I'm sure the conversations are occurring.
Yeah, I mean, this point is really in terms of migrating from those platforms. So actually, the solution that we'll be going through in a moment, on-demand migration for email, its biggest source platform is Google. So we migrate a lot of users from Google back to Office 365. There are notes and group-wise components as well that are migrating. We actually don't target anybody to Google Notes or GroupWise or any other solution. We're purely on the Microsoft stack in terms of where we're migrating to. So this is really conversions that need to happen if you're on one of these platforms and going to Exchange or Exchange Online.
Okay, and a shout out on Twitter to Charles Van Heusen correctly saying that Office 365 is not maintenance free. He actually has a point I'll bring up right at the end of the webinar. But okay, well let's continue because you're getting to the good stuff. You're getting to the partner stuff now.
Okay, so if you are thinking that you are going to do a migration but you're not real confident in the level of experience you have, you may want to start looking for a partner to help you do it. And so we wanted to lay out some of the questions that are helpful to kind of make that decision. And the first thing I would suggest is to start internally. So first, within your organization, before you start talking to anybody, figure out what's important for your organization in this transition and how you would define success. So if this project is successful, what does it mean for you? What does it mean for your users? What does it mean for your business? Because then you have, your perspective, which is what's really important in terms of getting to where you want to go, before you start talking to anybody else to give their opinion on what you should be doing. So it's important to understand what your needs are before you go forward. Then just figure out, based on that, and what you have internally in terms of resources and expertise, is it something that you think you can achieve? Everybody has day jobs, and so migration is just one more thing piled on top of it. So just figure out if it's something you think you can do on your own, or whether it's something you'd want some help with, either in terms of expertise or just because you don't have the bodies to do it. Then one of the key determining factors, you may want to have some sense in terms of your business. What would the impact be of cutting everybody over at once? And is that feasible? Or do you think that some level of coexistence going forward, and this coexistence word is a big word in a totally different conversation that we should have, but this is coexistence between users, but also coexistence with applications. So depending on the mail system you're using and the type of applications you have, they may have dependencies there that you need to consider. And so that coexistence may go beyond actually just moving the users over. It may continue past the mail migration itself. Then you need to figure out, as part of that conversation, whether this is a complex environment, whether you have multiple domain controllers you need to consolidate. How complex of a move is this? If you're going from a single server to Office 365, or if you're going from a relatively consolidated environment, it may not be something that you need if you have the right expertise in-house, but something to decide. And the last thing is really timelines. So somebody that's done it before is going to be able to do it faster. A solution that does it all the time is going to be able to do it better than just manually trying to copy data over. And so those are some of the things to think about. And I would talk about them internally, again, yourselves, and figure out what your answers are, and then start talking to partners and figure out, because it'll give you a better sense when they start giving you answers on how aligned your goals are. It'll help you make a better decision in that manner. So once you've done that, you may want to have some input into the migration solution as well. If you decide to go with a partner and just outsource the migration itself, they may have a solution they want to use. But you should probably have input in that as well, because it's going to impact your business. So does the solution you're looking at support the scenario you want? Do you need coexistence, and does it provide it? Do you have certain data that's really critical within your environment, and do they move that? So as part of that, you may want to make sure that the solution, you can get a list of what isn't migrated, so you can figure out if that's important. There's no solution out there that will migrate everything from one system to another, because there are just differences. Now, in exchange to exchange migration, it's pretty consistently migrated, so there's not a lot of differential. But if you're going from a Google or a Notes to Exchange, there's just differences in the way they work, and so not everything is going to be converted, and if even things that are converted may be converted differently by different solutions, and so you want to understand what those limitations are and make sure they're not going to have any kind of impact on your business. The other thing that's critical here is performance. You want to make sure whatever you're using can do it quickly. There are levels of coexistence that can be provided by certain solutions, but you still want to make sure that you're doing it in a streamlined manner. Most organizations don't want indefinite coexistence, and so performance is key, because it gives you more flexibility in timing the migrations. Really, at that point, if you get an efficient solution in place, you can decide on the migration timing based on your business and not on technical decisions, and so it really makes it a better process for your users. Then there's some other things like filtering capabilities, folder mapping and migration. You want to make sure there's detailed logging and support. One key thing here is on the passwords. You want to use a solution that doesn't require you to know all of your users' passwords. So either the solution should be able to connect in with an admin level account that can pull the data, or you should have a self-service component that can run silently and the users can put in their own password. You don't really want to be collecting passwords. It's just not a good practice as part of the migration. So what's our approach? We take a consolidated approach, so you'll see zero impact migration a lot. So regardless of where you are today and where you're going, we try to take kind of a four-columned approach here. You want to make sure that you prepare first. So there's always a pre-assessment that happens. And how that pre-assessment occurs is really up to you and how detailed it gets. But you want to make sure you understand the usage in the environment today. You want to make sure if there's cleanup opportunities that you take them, whether that's objects or mailboxes. If there's stuff that doesn't need to be migrated, don't migrate it, or archive it so that you can have access to it but not include it as part of the scope of the project. In terms of source platforms, we've talked a little bit about these, but making sure that you're going, if you have notes, GroupWise, Google, Exchange, and you'll notice that some of these are not mail systems because this is bigger. All of these projects typically are bigger than just a mail system because the mail systems are so integrated into other things. But whether your desktops need to be moved, user accounts, distribution list groups, those types of things, and even all the way down to operating system upgrades and migration as XP goes into life, for example. Want to make sure that all that stuff is covered. You put in whatever level of coexistence is needed for your organization, and there are different levels. Some of it may just be mail forwarding. Some of it may include application coexistence, which is a much bigger topic. And then after the migration, you want to make sure that you are set up to manage it. Particularly if you're coming from a non-Exchange platform, you may not be familiar with how to manage it. And so you want to make sure you're set up for the compliance and security you need, that you can administer the users, and that you're making sure that you have the ongoing application readiness there so that you're not having any business interruption. So we kind of take this broader consolidated approach, and then we drill down into the specifics based on the source and target you're going to. So with the assessment, we do have some solutions to help. We're getting close on time here, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But we have solutions that help you. We have a message stats product that will do an analysis of the environment. This will do both Exchange and notes. It will pull out information all the way from how many users you have, how active they are, if they're inactive, how much data they have, all the way down to things like who uses encryption within notes, so that you can better plan what needs to happen during the migration, who should migrate when, and if there's ways to archive or delete stuff that's just inactive. There's also a similar product for AD, by the way, for Reporter, so if you're doing some kind of an AD consolidation, that's also very helpful. There's a change auditor solution that has components for Exchange and Active Directory. It really allows you to protect the system and monitor it with alerts. So if you're concerned about changes that are being made, whether it's done by the migration solution you're going to use or whether it's done by a user in the organization, there are ways to set up specific monitoring to make sure you're notified of any changes, that you can even stop some changes from happening, and that you're alerted when anything critical happens. Recovery Manager is kind of a safety blanket beyond that. So if something happens during the migration or even after the migration that you didn't want to happen, this allows you to easily recover and get back to where you were. Whether that's somebody thought this group of users' mailboxes were migrated and then they deleted them off the source, or it's down to somebody deleted an OU and AD. You may want to be able to restore that. And so make sure those things are in place before you start so that you're protected. And then Archive Manager really allows you to decide if you don't want to migrate all of the data necessarily and convert it all, you can archive it in advance. You can import PSTs to the archive, and so it's just another way to deal with that data. So on-demand migration for email. We'll go through this pretty quickly, but really this is a solution that is hosted in Windows Azure. So it's basically a cloud-based migration platform. So there's no installation for most systems. For Notes, we do a web service installation locally. We did that because the access points available to Notes didn't give high enough fidelity for our liking, and so we actually do an extraction locally so that we can give you better fidelity during the migration. But in terms of Google, GroupWise, Exchange systems, all that extraction can happen from the cloud, and so we can push it directly through, and there's no need to install anything locally. really all you do is set up your source. You go to our website, you get licensed, or you can do it as you go, and you set up your source connections, and there's little help icons here to help you configure these. But you put in, for example, for GroupWise, you're going to use a consumer secret and consumer key that they've given you to access on an admin level. You can set up multiple target connections. So you can, if you're going to Office 365, for example, and you want multiple admin accounts, you can add up to 10 admin accounts. And each one of those admin accounts can migrate 10 users at a time. And so you can be doing up to 100 users simultaneously if you want. So it scales up fairly well for multiple sizes of organizations. Then you import a list of users. So in this case, we just have 2 here. This could be 2,000. It really just depends on how many you want to do at the same time. And then from there, you just pick your options. So I want to migrate email. You can put date ranges if you wanted. You can exclude certain things like your junk mail. You may not want to migrate it. There's also, down at the bottom here, you'll see a forwarding. So we do automate some routing. So if you want to set forwarding in some of the source systems so that any mail that comes in during the migration will route over to their new mailbox, you can do that as well. And it even can route in the other direction. So if you're going to do pre-staging of mailboxes, you may want to forward back to the source, and so you can do it in both directions. And then you just hit go. And it will give you a status of each of the users, tell you how many it's going to migrate, how many have been migrated. And over on the right, you can see if you want to drill into the details, you can get into the log of each user if you want to see what's happening with each one of them. But for each of your mailboxes you're migrating, it'll give you a status as you go through. And so I wanted to save a little bit of time for questions at the end. But Dell is really, Dell Software in particular has been doing migrations for a long time. Over 12 years, we've done millions of mailbox migrations, 30 million to Exchange, 40 million migrations of Active Directory users. Even NDS, we've done 10 million of those. So you can see that we've got a vast experience. We do have 24/7 support, and so we have support offices around the globe so that we can kind of do rolling support and make sure you're covered. A lot of migrations do happen off hours, and so having access to support, is critical in those times as well. And I think I will end with that and see if there's any questions.
Sure. There's one question, and then I want to follow up on Charles Van Heusen's observations, not really a question. The question is from Asan Satar, again, forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Quickly, in case of hybrid deployment for any customer before release of Wave 15, we need Exchange 2010 server as a hybrid server. So with the release of Wave 15, can we use Exchange 2010 as a hybrid server, or do we need to have Exchange 2013? So I think I understand what he's saying. Does that make sense?
Yep. I am not positive on the answer. However, I think you can. I just think there are some features that you may lose in doing that. It would be a good thing to talk through or look at TechNet and see. I'm sure there's articles describing that very scenario on TechNet. I haven't tried it myself, so I don't know for sure that you can do it. But I think there would be some considerations in terms of functionality, so I would investigate that a little bit.
Okay, and then we have longtime friend of the family, SMB Nation tribal member. This is just a funny comment. Stefan Hellersberg is saying, sorry I'm late, got stuck. Will I be able to get a recording of this? The answer is yes, Stefan, and appreciate your ongoing business, sir. Now, from Charles Van Heusen, longtime former Microsoft employee, now over at Avande consulting firm, he has forwarded to me one of the emails, a service alert, take action on these Office 365 administrative tasks. This relates to my early comment about kind of do nothing when it upgraded over the weekend. And Charles, sir, this is truly a case of read the manual, and I'll just leave it at that, RTM. There's actually a different acronym in the industry with coders, but it's read the manual, and he forwarded an email where it has a little checklist about upgrade your Office 365 SharePoint online site collections now, review the new system requirements, And another checklist item, review the new Office 365 privacy information. So that's absolutely right, sir. Thank you, Charles, for being up on Twitter and forwarding that. Let me double check. We got about 1 minute, so we maybe want to start our goodbyes. Yes, we're clear on the questions. So, Chad, why don't you take us out, and I'll do just a little bit of housekeeping, and we'll get everybody back to the salt mine on time.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining, and if there are any questions, please let us know, or if any additional detail would be beneficial, just contact us and we'll get over whatever information you need.
Excellent. And folks, on the housekeeping front, you'll be receiving an email from me tomorrow. A thank you email. Chad's going to see if we have permission to send the deck out. I hope so. And just a little bit of housekeeping. A shout out for the fall conference, fall.smbnation.com. And please, please, please take a very close look at our content. Quite frankly, it's the best ever. And you're going to see some migration conversations starting to emerge in the speech lineup. And that's October 10th through October 12th down in Las Vegas. Everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much for attending. Goodbye.